Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 113 of the Let's Talk Yoga podcast. I hope you are doing well. I am about 2 weeks post-op from my ACL reconstruction, and it's going pretty good. Learning to work with my newly constructed ACL. They built it out of my hamstring on the same leg. So it's been a interesting journey. I am in very little to no pain for the most part. I'm able to move around. I am now independent of crutches, which feels great. I still keep the brace on. I can't do much without the brace. Physical therapy has started. I have a really good physical therapist who understands the demands of yoga and dance, and he's slowly rehabbing me. My knee doesn't bend anywhere close to what it used to, but I'm learning to be patient on this journey. Overall, I don't really have anything to complain about other than the fact that I'm not able to walk much and dance and do a bunch of those outdoorsy things that I used to do. But I'm back at the gym. I'm slowly resuming very little yoga, like when I say yoga, asana. And I'm doing a lot of PT. I'm sure my PT will say I should be doing more. And just my whole life right now is centered around trying to bend the knee. Okay. And it doesn't look like it's bending much, but I know it's a gradual process. One of the things with an ACL reconstruction is just the ACL takes a long time to rehab. So that's kind of the phase I'm in, but fully functional again. And I can't wait to get back to teaching and doing my practice and stuff like that. But I'm sure you did not come on this podcast today to hear about my ACL rehab. Okay. I'm actually going to talk about something that I'm deeply passionate about. And that is, the topic is women's health. Okay. And because it's International Women's, it was International Women's Day a couple of days ago, but I'm calling it International Women's Month. And we're doing a couple of highlights on Aham Yoga Instagram page. And I thought I would extend that on the platform as well. When I say we're talking about women's health, I am referring to anyone who considers themselves a woman. Okay. So that's what I'm referring to here. And I've always been very passionate about women's health. When I look back, I think this is largely because my mother was very passionate about this. And from a very young age, she used to casually share with me about health and wellness, and she used to try a lot of these home remedies and things like that. So I took to it very naturally, and I also noticed that it was her struggles with her own health that deeply inspires me and motivates me, and sometimes it's fear too that makes me do a lot of the yoga that I do, and hope to age well. So in today's episode, whatever stage of life you are in, okay, I believe there is something in here for you to gain. I'm talking about a couple of different things across this podcast. One of them is I'm going to highlight the different stages or milestones in a woman's life biologically. And I'm going to talk about the kind of yoga that goes into these phases. Okay. And I'll do my best to leave you with asana names and pranayama practices and other deeper contemplative yoga practices in every stage. But I'm really hoping that by the end of this conversation, you will know whichever stage you're in or your students are in, you know what type of yoga you offer them and how their yoga evolves as their life stages evolve, right? Because a lot of times you'll notice in modern popular vinyasa studios that the asana remains the same, whether you're 21 years old or whether you're 80 years old. We're all trying to do the same asana. Is that the best approach? Is there a more thoughtful approach out there? And stuff like that is what we're going to explore in today's episode. So let's get to it. So to kick things off, I have a couple of questions for you, okay? Before I jump into it, according to you, what are the stages in a woman's life? Like biologically, what are the milestones, okay? And I want you to take a minute to think about this. Feel free to pause the podcast if needed. But what are a few physical milestones, biological milestones that one has to hit in their lifespan? Okay? And I've divided this into 4 stages. Okay. The first one is from birth to the time of getting towards puberty or close to puberty. The second stage is the onset and the stage of puberty itself. Okay. The third one is all things reproductive health, and I'm including fertility in this conversation here in this stage. And stage 4 is all things menopause, perimenopause, menopause itself, and the stage beyond menopause. Okay. Now let's get into all these stages one by one. Okay. So let's talk about from birth to puberty. And I'm going to breeze through this section. If you feel like you want me to do a more detailed episode on kids and yoga, then just feel free to find me somewhere online and we can connect, and you can just let me know it's a topic that is of interest to you and I'll bring it on the podcast. Okay. But children can start exploring yoga at any age. Okay. The benefits of yoga is something that more children should have access to. Okay. The practice has such a huge impact on their physical body and all the systems that support it, like the nervous system, the respiratory system, the digestive system, and so on. But more importantly, it greatly influences the emotional and behavioral aspects of children and adolescents by extension. And it has a very positive effect on their mental state, and it aids creativity. Okay. Just like you prep the soil before you sow some seeds, one needs to prepare the mind. Okay. And the mind assumes many stages. Right. And it is generally felt that adolescents can be pretty hard to influence and convince and work with. Right. But it's sometimes, some adolescents are very receptive and some are not. Okay. And yoga can help transform the quality of consciousness. Okay. Yoga can help transform the quality of consciousness, which is why it needs to be introduced at a very early stage if possible. The quality of consciousness is good when one is aware and receptive. And it is not so good if you find yourself lost in your own thoughts, unable to focus, and you're not able to absorb or retain any information, and you have poor memory. When kids start exploring yoga, it needs to be fun and relatable and not serious like how you and I go into a yoga class and learn. And I also suggest that you don't take a young kid into an adult's yoga class, because sometimes I have clients who try to do that at Aham Yoga, but kids have to be introduced to yoga in the right way. And sometimes I tell them that if you bring them into a class and I'm doing a very detailed alignment instruction type of class, it may be too boring and unrelatable for them, and they may never want to try yoga. So make sure you get them into a right class, okay, or the right class. Now, furthermore, the pineal gland, which is located at the top of the spinal cord, is a very important gland. Millions of years ago, the gland played a very active role in the development of the human brain. Okay. And also, if you think about it, it's also aided a lot of spiritual growth. Okay. And psychic abilities of people who came before us. And they also had better control over their emotions than at least we do today. Okay. But with the passage of time, the pineal gland has started to deteriorate, okay, and degenerate. And today it is more than just a vestigial gland that sits in our body, and it tends to degenerate at around the age of 8 more so. Okay. So we need to take a few measures to protect the pineal gland so it doesn't disappear over the next many generations. In yoga, the pineal gland correlates to the Ajna chakra. Okay, which is often referred to as the supermind or the third eye chakra. And the gland is very active in children. And by the time they turn 8 or 10, in that gap, in that phase, okay, it starts to calcify. And the pineal gland doesn't really play a big role in adult life. Okay. So when the pineal gland starts to degenerate, the pituitary gland starts to take over. And the pituitary gland is when it's active or overactive, emotions start acting up. And this is why so many children are labeled as emotionally unbalanced and disturbed during that adolescent and pre-adolescent phase. And the balancing quality of the pineal gland is what keeps the brain adaptive and receptive. And it's also the adrenal glands. They tend to be overactive in some children. Okay. And the adrenal glands play a very important role in regulating moral behavior of a child. So usually those with criminal tendencies, if I may use that word, have an overactive adrenal gland, and yoga can help regulate and bring balance. In India, children typically have their thread ceremony known as Upanayanam around the age of 8, and certain practices that come in with that. But children around this age are usually introduced to Surya Namaskar, Nadi Shodhana Pranayama, and the Gayatri Mantra, right? And there are many reasons why 8 is the number or the age that a child starts at. If this is something that is interesting to you, make sure you go to the link in the show notes and sign up for my newsletter. Next week, I will be sending out why the number 8 is significant in children's yoga. Okay. And if it's something you want for me to do on the podcast over time, just let me know. I'll bring that conversation here as well. Okay. But when a young girl starts yoga at the age of 8, it possibly can help in delaying the onset of early puberty. Nowadays, there's a lot of vast research that tells us that young girls are hitting puberty very early, or early, each year it's kind of getting, not each year, but over the course of many years, it's getting earlier than before. And that's because of a lot of external environmental factors, including things like changes in diet, lifestyle, eating a lot of processed food, stress, etc. So what yoga can do is help to bring them more in tune with their bodies. And a lot of these practices can actually help them cope with the changing inner and external environment. Okay, again, I can do a very detailed episode on this if this is a topic of interest for some of you. So just let me know. Okay, so that's stage 1, from birth to getting close to puberty. Stage 2 is hitting puberty and becoming a young woman. Right now, I want to divide this section up into 3 parts. Okay, and I'm going to talk a lot about period health and menstrual health in this segment. Okay, part 1 is about doing yoga for period health and what that actually means. Part 2 is about things you have to avoid during your period, and part 3 is about period health problems and how to address them. Okay, I'm going to be covering a lot of ground in today's episode, so feel free to pause and re-listen to any segment that you need to. Okay, now, in order to have overall good period health or menstrual health, make sure that you do yoga regularly. By yoga, I mean asana and pranayama, and dhyana being some sort of reflective and meditation aspect, okay, or contemplative practices. Doing yoga consistently will help improve period health for most people. There will be exceptions, okay? There will be some exceptions where due to a few biological reasons, women will have extremely painful periods, but maintaining a steady asana practice, pranayama practice between your cycles, okay, is good. Okay, it's not only to be done when you're hurting in your cycle, but doing it consistently will bring in a lot of benefits. Okay, and this kind of is overlooked. This adolescence phase is overlooked by a lot of people. But make sure you start your asana practice, pranayama practice earlier, and don't wait for issues to creep up before starting practice. Okay, now between your cycles, you can do anything. Make sure you hear that. In this stage of adolescence, you can do anything in your asana practice, pranayama practice, there are some things you have to keep away from. But in your asana practice, you could go really hard, vigorous vinyasa style type of practice if you want to. Your body is young, it's able. You could really push the limits on this one if you want to. Okay, I'm not saying you have to. It's an option. If you're opting for gentler practices, that will work too, as long as you're seeing and feeling the impact of the practice. All right. Part 2 is what asanas to avoid during your period. Okay. Traditionally, we're taught to avoid deep back bends because they stretch the organs out in the front of the body very strongly. Inversions are meant to be avoided during this period. Now, inversions has nothing to do. Asking you to skip inversions during your period has nothing to do with the literal outflow of blood. No, it has nothing to do with that. Okay. In fact, the reason why we are told not to invert during our period is because of how prana and apana interact. And apana, vayu, has a downward and outward flow. And when you go upside down, you are stopping the apana flow. And we're looking at the nature of apana and trying to maintain that, and hence we don't do inversions. So a lot of times there are people who are trying to bust the myth of don't do inversions during their period, and they look at it only from a very biological, physical standpoint, but actually it is beyond that. Okay, it is about the apana vayu and how that is meant to operate, that we avoid doing inversions during our period. Okay, we avoid deep twists because it puts a lot of pressure on the abdomen, strong core work, or even poses where you're lying on your belly like dhanurasana. We avoid some of that. Just hold off for a couple of days. You can do them later. Okay, and if you now, some women have a lot of energy during their period and they can come to classes and they can maintain an asana practice with some modifications, but some women are exhausted and they can barely get out of bed. They have a lot of pain and discomfort. If you belong to the latter, then just make sure you stay at home, get some rest, do a little bit of gentle asana if possible, some restorative yoga, but don't force yourself into a vinyasa class per se, because that's only going to work against you. Okay, and then the third and final part of this puberty segment is, if you're having issues with your period, right, like heavy cramping, heavy bleeding, restless legs, then talk to a qualified yoga teacher. there are things in yoga that you can do, and they differ. Okay, what you do in heavy flow is very different from what you do during, say, very low and scanty flow. Okay, so talk to a qualified yoga teacher and get a little more advice on what kind of practice or how to tweak your current practice to suit the needs of the phase that you are in. Okay, so that is part 2, all things puberty, early puberty, as in adolescent stage of being a young woman. Okay, and then let's get into part 3, which is reproductive health. Okay, when I say reproductive health, I'm not referring to only women who choose to have babies or become mothers in some form. Okay, because reproductive health is for everyone. Okay, and not just for women who choose to become mothers in some capacity. Okay, reproductive health has a lot to do with our hormonal health. Fertility is also a part of this conversation, and it can serve anybody in a stage of life, in your early 20s to your late 30s is the phase I'm referring to in this chunk. Okay, as always, you should continue to do a lot of asana, pranayama, dhyana in this stage, but you also start bringing in things like restorative yoga and softer practices and more contemplative practices. If you are specifically working on wanting to get pregnant, right, then talk to a very qualified asana teacher who can help you understand what to do during this phase, what to stay away from. If you are pregnant, then there is the whole conversation of doing prenatal yoga and all the reasons why prenatal yoga is so important. I many times meet a lot of women who come only for prenatal yoga, right? But if you are someone who's looking at getting pregnant at some point, start asana sooner. Okay, start asana pranayama sooner. You'll reap the benefits of it for a lot longer. And then a stage that doesn't get spoken about enough, according to me, is postpartum. Okay, I think women need more yoga in postpartum than prenatal because you end up giving so much and your body goes through such an evolution after giving birth. So postpartum yoga is very significant. There is so much for us to talk about in this phase. And I deeply encourage, again, I can do a whole podcast episode about what to do in postpartum. Okay. If that's something that is of interest to you, let me know. But essentially what I'm saying is, if you're having issues with hormonal health, talk to your yoga teacher. Okay, the more information and context you give your yoga teacher, assuming they're qualified enough to handle all of this, the better. Okay, there is prenatal yoga, there's postpartum yoga. I think women who have a lot of emotional responses to situations, circumstances, and who are stuck in their heads a lot of yoga will help. Okay, will help make you feel grounded and balanced and more at peace with yourself. So this is an important stage, early 20s to late 30s. Okay, don't try to break the narrative of coming to yoga to fix something. Instead, start to bring in yoga as a lifestyle. Okay, more than something that you fix when you're injured or when something's going off. So that's the third stage. Okay, there's a lot you can do. Again, it depends on woman. Every woman's different. Some women can still maintain a heavy, hardcore vinyasa type of practice in asana. Some people need to graduate as their body ages a little bit, as their hormones change. When they get to their mid-30s and beyond, energy levels change a little more. Again, everyone is different. Sometimes people opt for less strenuous asana practices. So it's very flexible. Okay, there is no one-size-fits-all practice. So a lot is open. If you're feeling energized to do hardcore asana practice, then please do. If that's draining you, then choose something a little more restorative. I don't literally mean restorative yoga. I just mean pick a different class, a different style that replenishes you and not depletes you. Okay. And then the final stage that we're going to talk about here is menopause, all things menopause. And I divide these into 3 stages for myself. When I'm talking to students about it, there is perimenopause, there's menopause itself, and then the stage beyond menopause, when your cycles have ceased fully. Okay, perimenopause can be a very hard phase. Menopause can be a very strong and hard transition for a lot of women. Okay, it is characterized by a lot of mood swings, a lot of heavy bleeding and cramping and irregular periods, and it is and hot flashes. And it can be a very challenging phase. And the hardest part is it lasts a very long time. Okay. So if you are someone in this phase, or you have students walking in and telling you that they are in this phase, then in that case, okay, in this phase, you want to tone down things like heavy duty vinyasa. Okay, you want to, especially if you are having erratic periods and heavy bleeding during your cycles, then you want to opt for gentler asana. Okay, you want to focus a little more on seated poses, supine poses, restorative poses, pranayama, something that restores you, regenerates you, and revitalizes you from within. Not necessarily the same old jump back, chaturanga, up dog, down dog type of practice. Okay, constantly doing the same thing in your body for years on end as a woman will not work for you in asana. Okay, so if you notice, the average age group of people in a yoga studio, in a vinyasa yoga studio, and I love vinyasa, I teach it too, I just don't teach it all the time, is early 20s to 50s probably. But after a certain point, you won't see a lot of older population in these classes because it's just not physically doable for them anymore. Okay, you'll see a lot of older practitioners in other styles where there are props that will support them, Iyengar yoga, yin yoga, restorative yoga. I'm just saying we got to strike a balance and know that our yoga changes as our life phases change. Okay, if you are an asana teacher and someone complains about heavy bleeding, perimenopause, just being tired all the time, do more seated poses, do more supine poses with them. Okay, do yoga in quadruped position, forward bending poses, forward fold, all of those will help. Avoid poses that require a lot of extra physical energy, right? A lot of exertion. This will only create more heat or pitta in the body, and they already have a lot of heat during this phase in their body. Okay, so a lot of vinyasa, core strengthening work, strong asana, all of this can feel exhausting. Again, every person's different, so you've got to see who's in front of you. I say that all the time. Opt for cooling asanas instead. I believe I've done a heating, cooling conversation, which poses are heating, which poses are cooling, which are neutral, and how to use them. I believe I've done it on the podcast before. I forget which episode it is right now. We'll try and put it in the show notes, but I know we've spoken about it on the podcast before if it's something you're not familiar with. Okay, so in this stage, you want to keep an eye on how much you load the joints, okay, because there is some amount of muscle atrophy happening. So make sure you are open to adapting the poses, open to bringing in props, reach for quieter, less asana focused practices. And educate your practitioners about the evolvement of asana and evolvement of yoga as your life stages evolve. And don't be stuck in one particular box of this is how it is always done. Okay, so I hope this episode was helpful. If you are in any of these stages and you have questions, feel free to reach us at you can reach us on Instagram. You could also screenshot your question and send it to us, and we'll share the answer on Instagram so other people can also benefit from your question and the response given. Okay, if you are at a hum yoga, then just ask us in class. Okay, but know that yoga can support you in all these phases, whether you are looking at yoga for your 7-year-old, or you are 20 years old and you're wondering what to do, or you are 38 and struggling with hormonal health issues, or you're in your perimenopausal phase. Yoga can support you in all these phases and beyond. And I hope this episode was helpful. As always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your support. If you found this podcast, this episode, and all the other episodes we've done on this podcast, please leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts and a rating on Spotify. It's the only way this kind of free content will get into the hands of other yoga students and teachers. Make sure you get on the newsletter, because I'm going to be sending out why the number 8 is significant for kids yoga in the weeks ahead. I will see you next week with another conversation, another guest. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.